They say family is your safest harbor. I learned the truth at 2 in the morning. Trapped in a hospital bed, shivering from the poison in my veins. My brother's smirk was all I saw before his hand clamped down on my life-saving IV tube. With one vicious jerk, he ripped it out. Warm blood spilled across the sheets, and I watched our mother silently block the door, waiting for me to fade. Hello, wonderful listeners of Maya Revenge Stories, and thank you so much for tuning in. YouTube has unfortunately disabled monetization on our channel, leaving us entirely without a budget to operate. So if you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 to help pay our staff's living expenses so they can continue creating for you. You can easily support us by scanning the QR code right on your screen or by clicking the donation link found in the video description or pinned comments. My name is Octavia Holland. I am 32 years old, and up until my world completely collapsed, I was a senior auditor at Ethelgard Logistics and Supply in Boston. My life was built on logic, numbers, and undeniable facts. But there was absolutely no logic to be found in the sterile, suffocating air of the intensive care unit. I had just clawed my way back from a deep, terrifying coma. The doctors were baffled, eventually diagnosing me with a severe and mysterious case of heavy metal poisoning. My body, once strong and capable, was now a fragile, broken shell. I was entirely tethered to a relentless symphony of medical machinery. A massive dialysis unit hummed aggressively next to my head, cycling my poisoned blood, while a complex web of intravenous tubes snaked into my bruised arms, delivering the life-saving fluids keeping my organs from shutting down completely. The hospital room felt incredibly small, shrinking around me like a plastic coffin under the harsh fluorescent lights. It was the absolute dead of night, the graveyard shift, outside my door. The hospital corridors were eerily quiet, save for the occasional distant beep of a heart monitor. Then, the heavy wooden door of my room creaked open. Shadows stretched across the linoleum floor before the figures stepped into the harsh light. It was my older brother, Julian, and trailing closely behind him was our mother, Beatrice. There was no warmth in their eyes, no tears of relief that I had finally woken up. Their faces were set in stone. Julian did not ask how I was feeling. He marched straight to the side of my bed, the smell of cheap cologne and stale coffee radiating off him. He slammed a thick manila folder directly onto my lap, right over my agonizingly tender stomach. I squinted through my fever-induced haze to read the bold print. It was a power of attorney document, drafted with aggressive legal jargon. He wanted control. Specifically, he was demanding I sign over total authority of the massive, highly profitable shares I had recently won following a brutal, years-long tech patent lawsuit. Those shares were worth an absolute fortune, and Julian wanted the keys to the vault. "Sign it, Octavia," Julian ordered, his voice a low, menacing growl. "You are clearly in no state to manage your finances. You are barely conscious. I am doing this for your own good. And Mom agrees with me." I looked past him to Beatrice. My own mother stood there, her face a blank mask of cold indifference. She gave a single, curt nod. A wave of nausea washed over me, stronger than any symptom of the poison. My skin was burning with a terrible fever, and every muscle in my body trembled violently. But my mind retained the sharp edges of a seasoned auditor. I saw the trap. "I am not signing a single page of that," I rasped. My throat felt like it was coated in crushed glass, but I forced the words out with absolute conviction. "I will let my lawyer handle all of my assets when the sun comes up." I slowly lifted my heavy, trembling right hand, extending my fingers toward the red nurse call button securely clipped to the bed rail. The exact moment my finger brushed the plastic, pure, unadulterated madness flashed across Julian's face. His eyes went wide and dark. He snapped his head back to look at our mother. Beatrice did not shout. She did not beg him to stop or calm down. Instead, she took 2 deliberate steps backward, pressing her spine flat against the heavy hospital door. She was intentionally blocking the narrow glass viewing window, entirely shielding whatever was about to happen from the empty hallway. "You selfish brat," Julian hissed. He lunged forward, throwing his entire body weight over the bed rail. He ignored the pen and the paperwork. Instead, his large, rough hand clamped aggressively around the thick cluster of plastic IV lines anchored directly into the delicate veins of my inner arm. I tried to scream, but my lungs were too weak. I tried to pull my arm away, but I was utterly pinned, with a brutal, savage jerk. Julian ripped his arm backward. The sensation was indescribable. A sharp, tearing agony sliced through my flesh as the thick needles were forcefully dragged out of my veins. It felt as though a hot knife was ripping my skin apart from the inside out. Hot, dark blood immediately surged from the ragged puncture wounds, pooling instantly and soaking rapidly into the crisp, white hospital sheets. My breath hitched in my chest as I gasped for air, paralyzed by the sudden spike of sheer physical trauma. Julian stumbled a few steps back, his chest heaving, his fists still clutching the tangled mess of torn plastic tubing. A slow, sickening sneer stretched across his lips as he looked down at the blood blooming across my bed. But the universe has a strange way of balancing the scales. At that precise second, before Julian could utter another word, the heavy wooden door behind my mother pushed violently inward. Beatrice gasped and stumbled forward, entirely losing her footing. Clara, the no-nonsense head nurse of the intensive care unit, stepped firmly into the room for my routine midnight vitals check. The heavy silence shattered. Clara froze completely, paralyzed in her tracks. Her seasoned medical eyes darted rapidly across the chaotic scene. She stared in pure shock at the massive, dark red puddle expanding across my bed, then traced the horrific mess up to my deeply lacerated, bleeding arm. Finally, her terrified gaze locked squarely onto Julian. He was still standing there, frozen like a statue, with his hand hovering mid-air, his fingers visibly dripping with his own sister's blood. The moment the heavy door swung open, the mask of cold indifference vanished from my mother's face. She launched into the performance of a lifetime. "Oh, thank heaven you are here," Beatrice cried out, her voice trembling with manufactured hysteria. She grabbed her own cheeks, feigning absolute terror. "My poor daughter is completely out of her mind. The anesthesia, the drugs, it is giving her terrible hallucinations. We tried to stop her, but she just grabbed her own tubes and ripped them right out of her arm." Clara did not flinch. She did not rush over to comfort my weeping mother. With the cold, calculating precision of a veteran trauma nurse, her eyes scanned the blood trajectory across the white sheets, the specific angle of the torn plastic tubes, and Julian's blood-stained fingers. The physics of the crime scene simply did not align with a self-inflicted injury. Without breaking her intense eye contact with my brother, Clara reached backward and slammed her palm onto the blue emergency panel on the wall, activating a code gray. The overhead speakers immediately crackled to life. Announcing a security emergency in my room, Clara stepped firmly into the threshold, planting her feet wide, using her own body to physically block the only exit. "Nobody moves," she ordered, her voice sharp and unforgiving. Within 2 minutes, heavy boots pounded down the hallway. 3 hospital security guards and 2 local police officers flooded the cramped space. The atmosphere shifted instantly from chaotic violence to a deeply procedural investigation. Julian quickly realized physical intimidation would not work against armed authorities. He pivoted seamlessly to arrogant dismissal. He leaned casually against a medical cart, crossing his arms over his chest, attempting to hide his bloody hands from plain view. "This is a massive overreaction," Julian scoffed, shaking his head with an exaggerated sigh. "My sister is delirious. She got tangled in the lines while thrashing around. I was simply trying to untangle them so she would not hurt herself. We are her family." The lead police officer, a tall man with sharp, observant eyes, pulled out a notepad. He looked at me, lying there bleeding and exhausted. I gathered every single ounce of strength left in my battered, poisoned body. I looked straight into the officer's eyes. my voice barely a whisper but laced with pure iron. "He is lying. He attacked me. He demanded I sign over my financial assets, and when I refused, he ripped the IV out by force, and my mother stood guard at the door as an accomplice." Beatrice gasped in feigned horror, clutching her chest, but her theatrical performance was about to be permanently cancelled. What neither she nor Julian realized was that Commonwealth Heights Hospital had just completed a massive renovation spanning several $1 million. As part of that structural upgrade, the critical care wing was outfitted with state-of-the-art artificial intelligence monitoring cameras. The officer tapped his shoulder radio, requesting the security desk to review the feed from the past 15 minutes. The response crackled back almost instantly. The high-definition lens had captured everything in perfect, undeniable clarity. It recorded Julian's violent lunge, the forceful upward pull of his arm that could only come from an external attacker, and crucially, my mother deliberately repositioning herself to block the door window before the assault even began. But I was not finished. In my line of work, dealing with high-stakes financial auditing and corporate fraud, threats from desperate people were an occupational hazard. Extreme paranoia had become my second nature. I raised my uninjured left hand, pointing a trembling finger at a thick, matte black band on my index finger. "Officer," I breathed out, "I wear a biometric smart ring. It is programmed to automatically activate its audio recorder whenever my heart rate spikes above 120 beats per minute. It caught everything." The officer stepped forward, carefully assisting me as I synced the smart ring to my mobile phone. A second later, the undeniable sound of Julian's voice filled the quiet hospital room. His sinister threats echoed off the sterile walls, demanding I hand over my wealth, followed by my clear refusal. And finally, the sickening sound of the physical struggle. The arrogant smirk instantly melted off Julian's face, replaced by a pale, sickening dread. Beatrice's fake tears dried up entirely. She stared at me as if I were a monster, realizing her own daughter had just sealed her fate. The police did not hesitate or wait for further explanations. They read them their rights, slapped cold steel handcuffs onto Julian's wrists, and escorted both of them out of the hospital under the harsh glare of the hallway lights. As the door clicked shut behind them, Clara immediately rushed to my side, applying firm pressure to my bleeding arm. An emergency judge would grant me a temporary restraining order within 24 hours. My physical wounds would eventually heal. But as I lay there staring at the empty doorway, the realization settled heavily in my chest. My family had not just betrayed me, they had tried to destroy me. The investigation into the bloody hospital room was over, but the investigation into their absolute depravity had just begun. After exactly 14 grueling days under tight hospital security, I was finally discharged. The heavy metal toxins had ravaged my nervous system, leaving me heavily reliant on a sleek carbon fiber walking cane. But my mind had never been clearer. Harper, my fiercely loyal best friend and incredibly ruthless personal lawyer, was waiting right at the hospital exit. She drove me straight to her fortified townhouse, completely bypassing my own apartment for security reasons. Once we were safely locked inside, behind heavy steel deadbolts and drawn thick curtains, the real work began. I refused to rest. I needed to understand the mechanics of this ultimate betrayal. Why did Julian need cash so desperately that he was willing to commit murder in a brightly lit intensive care unit? I booted up my heavily encrypted work laptop. My physical body was broken, but I was still a senior financial auditor. Tracking hidden money was my primary language, and nobody could hide numbers from me. Harper poured 2 large mugs of strong black coffee and pulled up a chair beside me. Her eyes locked on the glowing screen. We spent the next 6 hours diving deep into Julian's digital footprint. In my professional experience, family inheritance disputes usually follow a predictable pattern, but as we dug through offshore financial registries and buried public records, I realized this situation was drastically different from standard cases by at least 70%. Julian did not just owe money to a few aggressive bookies due to a bad gambling habit. The reality was significantly more sinister. He had constructed a highly complex shell company, registered under a fictitious corporate alias in a notorious tax haven. Through this invisible entity, he had been actively defrauding several dangerous, underground investment funds. We were not talking about a few $1,000s. He had stolen millions of dollars. And the people he stole from were not the type to settle disputes in a civil courtroom. They were the type to send armed men to your front door in the middle of the night. "Octavia, look at this document," Harper said, her voice dropping to a tense, harsh whisper. She pointed her manicured finger at a freshly downloaded property deed on the monitor. My breath caught in my throat. It was the original deed to our ancestral family estate, a beautiful property my grandfather had built decades ago. But there was a newly attached, heavily binding lien stamped across the digital page. My mother, Beatrice, had not merely been manipulated by her golden boy. She had willingly signed away the deed, using our historical home as collateral to personally guarantee his fraudulent loans. She was an active, willing participant in a massive financial crime. If Julian defaulted on those massive payments, the underground investors would seize the house immediately. But far worse, the resulting financial fallout would inevitably trigger a federal investigation, exposing her direct involvement in the laundering scheme. Beatrice was staring down the barrel of a 10 to 15-year sentence in a federal penitentiary as an accomplice to major financial fraud. A wave of icy realization washed over me, freezing the blood in my veins. The illusion of family completely shattered. Beatrice was not protecting Julian out of blind, misguided motherly love. She was protecting her own freedom. They did not view me as a daughter or a little sister. To them, I was nothing more than a convenient, walking blood bank. I was a highly profitable, sacrificial lamb, ready to be slaughtered just so they could liquidate my hard-earned assets, pay off their criminal debts, and avoid wearing prison uniforms. My hands began to shake, but this time, it was not a symptom of the poison. It was the adrenaline of a terrifying new hypothesis forming in my brain. I opened a new browser tab and logged directly into my secure medical patient portal. I pulled up the detailed toxicology reports from my coma. The lead toxicologist had noted that the heavy metals had accumulated in my system over a period of roughly 4 to 6 months. I reached into my bag, pulled out my physical leather-bound planner, and laid it flat on the desk. "Harper, read the dates of my major medical episodes out loud to me," I instructed, my voice devoid of any human emotion. She read them straight from the hospital file. The 2nd week of October, when I had my first severe migraine, the 4th of November, when I collapsed in my office, and finally, the exact day my organs began to shut down in late December. I traced my fingers slowly down the pages of my planner. Cross-referencing her words, every single one of those dates had an identical, seemingly harmless entry written in my neat blue ink. Dinner at Mom's house, the severe stomach cramps, the debilitating nausea, the sudden loss of motor control. They all perfectly followed those intimate Sunday family meals. My mother had been the one cooking the food. She had been the one pouring my favorite red wine. The heavy metals were not an accident from a warehouse inspection or a random environmental hazard. It was a slow, calculated, and deeply intimate assassination attempt happening right across the dining room table. They were poisoning me for months, trying to induce a natural-looking organ failure so they could inherit my shares quietly as my next of kin. Ripping out the IV at the hospital was merely a desperate, panicked improvisation when their slow poison failed to finish the job before I woke up. "They tried to kill you," Harper whispered, her face pale as she stared at the perfectly aligned dates on the wooden desk. "Yes," I replied, slamming the laptop shut with a sharp, definitive crack. "And now, I am going to ruin them." The retaliation came faster than I anticipated, and it did not come with a knife. It came buried under a mountain of pristine, officially stamped legal documents. Knowing that Harper and I were quietly building a criminal case, Julian and my mother launched a ruthless preemptive strike. On a Tuesday morning, a courier delivered a massive envelope to Harper's fortified front door. It was a formal petition filed in family court, demanding an immediate medical conservatorship over my entire life. They had hired a team of vicious, high-priced defense attorneys to completely rewrite reality. The petition blatantly weaponized my hospitalization. Instead of a victim of heavy metal poisoning, their legal filings painted me as a deeply paranoid, unstable woman who was intentionally ingesting industrial chemicals in a desperate, deranged cry for attention. The documents claimed I was a danger to myself and entirely incapable of managing my own vast financial estate. They wanted the judge to grant Julian absolute legal authority to sign my checks, manage my assets, and dictate my medical care. The psychological warfare did not stop at the courthouse. My mother, playing the role of the heartbroken, long-suffering matriarch, began calling every single aunt, uncle, and cousin in our extended family tree. She spun a fabricated web of lies, weeping into the phone about how my newfound wealth had triggered a severe psychotic break. My phone buzzed relentlessly for 3 straight days. The text messages from relatives poured in, an endless stream of toxic condemnation. My aunt called me a delusional, ungrateful wretch. A cousin I had not spoken to in 5 years left a scathing voicemail. "You are a sick, ungrateful monster," the voice hissed through the speaker. "You are trying to throw your own mother and brother in prison over a few dollars. You need to be locked in a psychiatric ward before you destroy this family." They bought the narrative hook, line, and sinker. Nobody asked for my side of the story. I was entirely isolated, cut off from the very people who were supposed to represent my roots. The sheer weight of their collective judgment felt like a physical pressure crushing my chest, designed to suffocate me until I surrendered. But Julian's cruelty knew absolutely no bounds. He understood that my career was my armor, so he decided to strip that away. 2. On a Thursday afternoon, he showed up unannounced at the massive glass headquarters of Ethelgard Logistics and Supply. He did not go to my cubicle. He went straight to the executive floor. He deliberately wore a wrinkled shirt, rubbed his eyes until they were bloodshot, and played the part of an exhausted, terrified brother perfectly. According to a horrified colleague who witnessed the spectacle, Julian actually cried in front of the board of directors. "I am so deeply sorry for the disruption." Julian wept to my bosses. "But my sister's mental health has completely deteriorated. She is suffering from severe delusions of persecution, and we are just trying to get her the help she desperately needs." He planted the seed of doubt right in the center of my professional world. An auditor must be trusted implicitly. By painting me as a paranoid schizophrenic, he was actively burning my hard-earned career to ashes. The smear campaign was terrifyingly effective. Even the authorities began to waver. The lead detective assigned to the hospital assault called Harper, his tone significantly colder than it had been a week prior. Julian's lawyers had flooded the police precinct with fabricated character witness statements and heavily doctored records exaggerating a minor bout of college anxiety I had experienced a decade ago, twisting it into a lifelong history of severe, untreated depression. The prosecutor was suddenly hesitating to file the attempted manslaughter charges, terrified of putting an allegedly unstable, unreliable victim on the witness stand in front of a skeptical jury. The instinct to scream, to lash out, to defend myself on every social media platform was overwhelming. I wanted to post the toxicology reports, the audio recordings, to scream the truth until my throat bled. It is a terrifying thing to watch your own reality be dismantled by the people who gave you life. But I remembered the fundamental rule of a high-stakes corporate audit. When the target is panicking and throwing up loud smoke screens, you do not engage in the chaos. You stay quiet. You step back, and you let them keep talking while you quietly secure the exits. I threw my ringing mobile phone into a desk drawer and locked it. I did not post a single word online. I did not return a single angry phone call to my relatives. I sat in the dim light of Harper's office, leaning heavily on my cane, and embraced the absolute, suffocating silence. While my family was busy performing a loud, sloppy circus for the public, Harper and I were quietly weaving a massive, inescapable net in the dark. They thought they were burying me under their lies. But they did not realize they were simply digging their own graves a little deeper. Julian was a ruthless manipulator and a violent thug, but he was certainly not a forensic accountant. His offshore shell company was built on arrogance rather than actual digital security. For someone like him, hiding stolen money might seem like a game of shadows. But for someone who spent 60 hours a week penetrating corporate financial firewalls, his digital infrastructure was an absolute joke, operating from the heavily secured guest room in Harper's townhouse. I turned my professional skills into a weapon. I did not just look at public records. I dug into the hidden back end of the internet. I traced the routing numbers, bypassed his cheap encryption protocols in under 45 minutes, and broke right into the central ledger of his fictitious corporate entity. What I found was a textbook money laundering operation. He had systematically siphoned roughly $7 million from dangerous underground investors, masking the transfers through fake consulting invoices. I downloaded every single byte of data. I backed up the raw ledgers, the encrypted wire transfer logs, and the explicit digital footprint linking his personal laptop to the fraudulent accounts. The local police precinct was currently dragging their feet, terrified of prosecuting a messy family dispute without a perfect victim. But federal agents do not care about a mother crying on the telephone, and they certainly do not care about fake psychiatric rumors. I decided to completely bypass the local authorities. I spent an entire night drafting 2 highly classified, exquisitely detailed whistleblower dossiers. I sent the first one directly to the regional field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, specifically targeting their white-collar crime division. I sent the second dossier straight to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. I did not just report a crime. I handed them a massive, airtight federal indictment wrapped in a silver bow. With the explosive charges set, it was time to lure my family directly onto the landmine. We needed them to feel victorious. Harper reached out to Julian's high-priced legal team on a Monday morning. She deliberately softened her voice, sounding entirely defeated and exhausted. She told them that the public pressure was simply too much, that my spirit was broken, and that I was finally ready to surrender my assets to make the nightmare stop. We formally agreed to attend a legally recorded mediation session at their luxurious downtown law firm to finalize and sign the power of attorney documents. The conference room on the 40th floor smelled strongly of expensive leather and lemon polish. I walked in leaning heavily on my carbon fiber cane, ensuring I took slow, trembling steps to appear as small and defeated as possible. Beatrice immediately rushed forward from the corner of the room. She began shedding large, theatrical crocodile tears, playing the role of the merciful, loving matriarch in front of the assembled lawyers. "Oh, Octavia, my sweet girl, I am so incredibly relieved you finally came to your senses," Beatrice cried. Reaching out to touch my shoulder, I flinched away, keeping my eyes locked on the floor. Julian sat at the head of the massive mahogany table, looking like a victorious king who had just conquered a rebellious province. He wore a sharp-tailored suit and a painfully smug smile. He slid the thick, legally binding power of attorney document across the polished wood toward me, followed immediately by a heavy gold fountain pen. Right in the center of the table, a professional legal recording device sat with its bright red light blinking steadily, ensuring every single word spoken in the room was entered into the official legal record. It was absolutely perfect. I picked up the document, intentionally letting my hands shake violently. I began flipping through the pages, breathing heavily. "Julian," I said, keeping my voice small, hesitant, and laced with fake fear. "If I sign my life away today, I need to know the money is going to the exact right place. I need to know this ends the threats. Are you absolutely sure my shares will cover the massive deficit in your offshore Apex Holdings account?" Julian rolled his eyes, clearly annoyed by my hesitation, but entirely too eager to close the multi-million-dollar deal to remain silent. "Yes, Octavia, for the last time. The liquid funds from your tech shares will directly offset the missing capital from the Apex investments. It covers everything we owe." I pushed the blade in a little deeper, looking up at my mother. Even the specific funds you redirected from those private underground investors? The massive loans Mom personally guaranteed using the ancestral house as collateral? Beatrice chimed in quickly, desperate to get my signature on the dotted line before I changed my mind. Yes, darling. Exactly. Once you sign that paper, the debt for the shell company is completely wiped clean. The investors are paid off, and the house is safe from foreclosure. We can finally just go back to being a normal family. Got them. A full, uncoerced, highly specific verbal confession to covering up a fraudulent shell company with extorted funds, recorded permanently on their own defense attorney's audio system. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet instantly. I stopped shaking. I straightened my spine, letting the heavy carbon fiber cane drop loudly to the floor. I picked up the expensive gold pen, looked Julian dead in the eye, and tossed it carelessly over my shoulder. It clattered sharply against the hardwood floor. I am not signing a single thing, I said, my voice ringing with cold, hard, unwavering authority. Julian's smug smile vanished, replaced by a flash of violent anger. He slammed his hands flat on the table. "What kind of sick game is this?" he demanded, his voice echoing in the large room. "I have one more piece of paperwork for your legal team to review," I replied calmly, sliding a single sheet of paper from my coat pocket and dropping it onto the table. "You see, while you were busy telling every single relative in our family that I was crazy, I sent a hair follicle sample to an independent forensic laboratory. Hair retains heavy metal toxins perfectly for months. The results came back yesterday morning. The specific industrial compound systematically destroying my organs is a 100% chemical match to a highly toxic solvent purchased 3 months ago using your personal platinum credit card." The absolute silence that followed my revelation lasted only a fraction of a second. Then, Julian's face contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged rage. The polished facade of the wealthy businessman completely shattered, revealing the desperate, cornered animal underneath. He let out a visceral roar, planting his hands flat on the mahogany table and vaulting his entire body weight across the wood. His expensive suit jacket knocked over crystal water glasses as he lunged directly for my throat, ready to finish the violent job he had started in the intensive care unit. But he never reached me. Before his outstretched hands could even brush the collar of my coat, the heavy double doors of the conference room violently burst open. It was not a panicked legal assistant rushing in to break up a family argument. It was a perfectly synchronized entry by federal and local law enforcement. 2 burly agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, wearing tactical vests over their dress shirts, stormed into the room, followed closely by the same sharp-eyed lead detective who had interviewed me on my hospital bed. "Julian Holland, do not move a single muscle," the lead federal agent bellowed, his hand resting firmly on his holstered weapon. Julian froze in midair, awkwardly sprawled across the expensive conference table. The arrogant fight instantly drained from his body, replaced by cold, paralyzing terror. 2 officers forcefully grabbed his shoulders, dragging him off the table and slamming him face first against the nearest paneled wall. The sharp metallic click of heavy handcuffs echoing through the quiet room was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my entire life. The local detective stepped forward, holding up a thick stack of printed warrants. "Julian Holland, you are no longer dealing with a simple domestic dispute," the detective stated, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "Based on the undeniable forensic evidence of long-term heavy metal poisoning we received this morning, the district attorney has officially elevated your charges. You are under arrest for attempted manslaughter, aggravated assault, and conspiracy to commit murder for financial gain." Across the room, Beatrice let out a blood-curdling shriek. She scrambled backward, hitting the wall, desperately trying to escape the reality collapsing around her. A female federal agent calmly approached her, pulling out a second pair of steel handcuffs. "Beatrice Holland," the agent said clearly, entirely ignoring my mother's hysterical sobbing, "you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, conspiracy to commit financial fraud, and being an accessory to attempted murder." My mother completely broke down. Her knees gave out, and she slumped to the luxurious carpet, weeping uncontrollably. As the officers hauled her up by her arms, she violently twisted her neck to look at me. Her face was a mess of smeared makeup and absolute desperation. "Octavia, please!" she screamed, her voice cracking with raw panic. "Tell them to stop. I am your mother. You cannot let them do this to me. Please, save me." I slowly bent down and picked up my carbon fiber walking cane. I straightened my posture, leaning comfortably on the handle. I looked directly into the eyes of the woman who had smiled at me across the dinner table while knowingly feeding me poison. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a cold, empty void where a daughter's love used to reside. I did not utter a single word to her. I simply turned my back and walked out of the conference room, leaving her pathetic screams to fade behind the heavy wooden doors. The justice system is usually agonizingly slow, but when you hand federal prosecutors a neatly bow-tied package of biometric audio recordings, high-definition artificial intelligence hospital footage, offshore bank ledgers, and airtight toxicology reports, the wheels turn with terrifying speed. Julian's expensive defense attorneys were rendered completely powerless. There was absolutely no defense to mount. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable evidence, both of them were forced to take plea deals to avoid spending the rest of their natural lives behind bars. The sentencing hearing was swift and entirely devoid of mercy. The judge looked at them with absolute disgust. Julian was sentenced to 15 years in a federal penitentiary with no possibility of early parole. Beatrice, weeping silently in an orange jumpsuit, received a harsh 5-year sentence. True to the cruel nature of their crimes, the financial fallout was absolute. Without the fraudulent money to protect her, the bank immediately foreclosed on our ancestral family estate, auctioning it off to the highest bidder to cover the massive debts. As the news of their convictions hit the local papers, my mobile phone suddenly lit up again. The same aunts, uncles, and cousins who had ruthlessly smeared my name and called me a delusional monster were now frantically sending massive paragraphs of apologies. They begged for my forgiveness, claiming they were horribly manipulated and wanted nothing more than to repair our broken family bonds. I read the first 2 sentences of one text message, felt a wave of absolute exhaustion wash over me, and tapped a single button. I permanently blocked every single phone number associated with my extended family. I took a pair of digital shears and permanently severed myself from that rotten, poisonous root system. 6 months later, the air high above the city of Boston was crisp and clean. I stood on the sprawling balcony of my new, highly secured penthouse apartment, wrapping my hands around a steaming ceramic mug of hot coffee. I lifted my right arm, admiring the smooth, unblemished skin where the brutal intravenous tubes had once been violently ripped out. My body was completely healed. My mind was finally quiet, looking out at the brilliant city skyline. A profound realization settled deep into my bones. True family has absolutely nothing to do with shared bloodlines or common last names. Family consists of the people who protect you in your darkest hours, the ones who stand fiercely by your side, and the ones who never, ever try to take your life. Thank you so sincerely to every single one of you for tuning in and listening to my story today. I would absolutely love to know where you are listening from. So please let me know in the comments below. If you found today's story engaging and want to help our channel stay alive, please consider supporting us with just $1. You can easily do this by scanning the donation QR code right here on the screen, or by clicking the donation link provided in the video description and pinned comments. Your incredible generosity goes directly toward paying our hardworking staff's salaries, allowing them to feed their families and continue bringing you more amazing stories every single week. Stay safe and take care of yourselves.